6 armed men rode onto Harlan Briggs's property on a Tuesday morning. He was on his second cup of coffee. Their leader stood in the doorway and said the words that had made men abandon their homes and their land for 30 years across that part of Texas. "Ride out or be carried out." Harlan Briggs looked at the man, then he looked at his coffee. He set the cup down on the table, slowly, carefully, the way a man sets something down when he's decided he won't be needing it for a while. Then he said something. What he said in the next 30 seconds ended the careers of 3 of those 6 men. And it made Harlan Briggs the most talked-about man in Ector County for the next 40 years. He was 67 years old. He had built that ranch with his own hands, and he was not leaving. This channel tells the stories of the men who built Texas and refused to let it be taken. Subscribe now. You need to hear what Harlan said. West Texas, 1882, the kind of land that only certain men wanted. Not beautiful, not forgiving. Flat in every direction, the kind of flat that makes you feel exposed because you are. Water scarce, summer brutal, winter sudden and mean. Odessa, Texas, had 400 people in 1882. Most of them had come for reasons that made sense at the time. Land prices, railroad rumors, the particular freedom of a place that hadn't yet decided what it was going to be. Harlan Briggs had been there for 22 years. He'd come in 1860, before the war, before most of what was around him existed. He'd built his house from the ground up, dug his well by hand, run cattle on land that most men had looked at and kept riding. 67 years old in 1882, still working his own land every day. 2 grown sons who had moved on to their own places. A wife named Ruth who had died 11 years earlier and whose garden he still maintained at the east side of the house. He maintained it because she had planted it, and because some things a man does not stop doing just because the reason has gone. In 22 years on that land, Harlan Briggs had outlasted drought, disease, cattle thieves, and a Comanche raid in 1864 that had taken 3 of his neighbors. What he had not done in 22 years was talk about what he'd done before 1860. Not to his sons, not to his neighbors, not to anyone. Everyone in Ector County knew Harlan Briggs. Nobody knew who Harlan Briggs had been. On a typical morning, Harlan was up before sunrise, fed his horses before he fed himself, checked the fence line on the north pasture, which had been giving him trouble since the last hard rain. By 7 o'clock he was on his second cup of coffee on the porch, watching the day establish itself. This was his hour, the one part of the day that was purely his own. 3 miles east, Odessa was waking up, the blacksmith's hammer starting its day, the general store opening its shutters. On the morning of September 8th, 1882, Harlan saw riders coming from the direction of town, not the road, across the open range, 6 of them, moving with the specific kind of confidence that didn't need a road. Harlan watched them come the way a man watches weather, with attention but without alarm. They pulled up in a loose semicircle in front of his porch. 6 horses, 6 men, all of them armed. The leader was a man Harlan hadn't seen before, 40, maybe 45. The kind of face that had learned early that looking a certain way made things easier. Hard eyes. Easy posture, a man who had done this many times before. Harlan looked at them over his coffee cup. He had seen men like this before, more than once, in places these men would not have expected. The leader looked at the house, looked at the cattle, visible in the north pasture, looked at Harlan. "This your spread?" he said. 22 years, Harlan said. The man nodded like the length of time was irrelevant information. "We represent interests that are acquiring land in this county," he said. "You'll be receiving a fair offer. Haven't received an offer yet, Harlan said. You're receiving it now, the man said. He held out an envelope. Harlan looked at it. Didn't take it. The man dropped it on the porch rail. Take the night to think about it, he said. Then he said the words, ride out or be carried out. Not angry, not threatening in tone, just informational. The way a man gives information he has given many times before and expects to be understood. Harlan looked at him. Then he looked at his coffee. Then he set the cup down. The 6 men waited. They had learned that the pause after the words usually produced results. Men calculated. Men thought about their families. Men thought about what carried out meant. Harlan stood up, slowly. Not the slow of a man, afraid or stalling, the slow of a man with bad knees who had learned not to hurry the process. 3 of the 6 men shifted in their saddles, hands moving. Harlan ignored them completely. He walked to the door of his house. The leader's easy posture tightened slightly. This was not the expected response. Harlan stopped at the door, turned. You boys want coffee? He said. The 6 men looked at each other. In 30 years of doing what they did, in towns from Kansas to New Mexico, nobody had ever offered them coffee. The leader recovered. We're not here for coffee, he said. No, Harlan said. I suppose you're not. He walked back to the porch rail, picked up the envelope, opened it, read it. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Not fear. Something quieter than fear and considerably more dangerous. He folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, set it on the porch rail. He looked at the leader. My answer is no, he said. You can take the envelope back with you. The leader studied him. Something about this old man was not landing the way old men usually landed. You understand what we're telling you, the leader said. I understand what you're telling me, Harlan said. I've heard it before. They rode out. They would be back. They always came back. Harlan sat back down, picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He set it back down, and he started thinking. For the rest of that morning, Harlan walked his property, not the fence check he did every day, something more deliberate. He walked to the north pasture and stood where he dug the first fence post in 1860. He walked to the well he dug by hand in 1861. He walked to the east side of the house where Ruth's garden still grew. He stood in the garden for 5 minutes, not praying, not grieving, just standing in a place that meant something. When he came back inside, his decision was made. It had probably been made before the men arrived. He wrote 3 letters, one to his son Thomas in Midland, one to his son Carl in Fort Stockton, one to the sheriff of Ector County, a man named Willis Pratt, who Harlan had known for 12 years. He sealed all 3, rode into Odessa that afternoon, posted the letters. The postmaster, a man named George Hensley, had known Harlan Briggs for 15 years. He had never seen Harlan come to town to mail letters. Harlan was not a man who wrote letters. Everything all right, Harlan? George asked. Getting there, Harlan said. He rode back to the ranch, made himself a proper meal for the first time in a week, cleaned his rifle, oiled it, set it beside the door where he could reach it without thinking. Then he sat down, and he waited. The men came back that night. He knew they would. They always came back at night. They came at midnight, not 6 men this time, 4. The leader had left 2 men with the horses a quarter-mile south, standard approach for night work. Harlan was awake. He'd been awake since 10, sitting in his chair beside the window with no lamp lit. An old habit from a time the men outside would not have expected. He heard them when they were still 100 yards out. Not because they were loud, because he knew what to listen for. Before 1860, before West Texas, before Ruth and the garden and 22 years of cattle and fence line. Harlan Briggs had spent 8 years doing work that required knowing how men moved in the dark. He had not done that work in 22 years. Some things, however, do not entirely leave a man. The 4 men reached his door. 2 went to the back. 2 stayed at the front. Textbook. Harlan stood without making a sound. He picked up his rifle, not because he intended to shoot anyone, because a man who knows what he's doing gives himself options. The leader knocked, which was interesting. Men doing this kind of work at midnight rarely knocked. "Mr. Briggs," the voice said, conversational, almost friendly. "Let's not make this difficult." "It's already difficult," Harlan said through the door. "You made it difficult this morning." Silence from outside. "I know there are 2 of you at the back," he said. "Tell them to come around front." Long silence, then footsteps. The 2 men from the back came around. The leader was reprocessing the situation. The old man had known there were men at the back. Without a lamp, without looking. "Mr. Briggs," he said again, "there doesn't need to be trouble here." "No," Harlan said. "There doesn't. So here's what's going to happen." Harlan opened the door. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle held at his side. Not raised, not pointed, just present. The 4 men saw him in the moonlight, and something changed in the way they were standing. "I've written to the sheriff," Harlan said. "Willis Pratt. He'll be here by Thursday. I've written to my sons. They'll be here by Friday. And I've written to a man in Austin whose name I won't tell you. He'll be here when he gets here." The leader said nothing. "Now," Harlan said, "you can come back tomorrow with whatever you're planning to come back with. That's your business. But I want you to think about something before you do." He looked at each of them in turn. The way a man looks at people when he wants them to understand he's seeing them specifically, not as a group, as individuals. "I'm 67 years old," he said. "I've outlasted everything this country has thrown at me for 22 years. You're not the worst thing that's come at me." Nobody moved. "You're making a mistake," the leader said. "Maybe," Harlan said. "But it's my mistake to make. On my land." They left. Not running, walking, but they left. Harlan watched until they were gone. Then he sat back down in his chair. And he did not sleep. Not from fear. From the specific alertness of a man who knows that the night isn't over just because the visitors left. By morning, Odessa knew. George Hensley, the postmaster, had watched Harlan mail 3 letters the afternoon before. He'd told the blacksmith. The blacksmith had told the barber. In a town of 400 people, information traveled faster than horses. By 8 in the morning, 6 men from town had ridden out to Harlan's place, not the sheriff. He was 2 days away. Just men, neighbors, the blacksmith, the barber, the man who ran the livery. 3 ranchers from adjacent properties. They arrived to find Harlan on his porch, still awake, still in the same chair, coffee that had actually stayed warm this time because he'd made a fresh pot. He looked at them with something close to surprise. "You didn't need to come," he said. The blacksmith, a large man named Cobb who had known Harlan for 15 years, looked at him steadily. "Yes, we did," Cobb said. "They stayed. All day, working Harlan's fence, fixing the north pasture gate that had needed fixing, eating lunch that Harlan made because he was not a man who let people on his property without feeding them." By afternoon, there were 11 men. 2 more had ridden out from town. A rancher from 8 miles north who had heard through his ranch hand. Harlan watched them from his porch. He was not a man who showed what he felt easily, but he was also not a man who pretended not to feel it. The leader came back, not to the ranch, to the edge of the property, far enough to see without approaching. He sat on his horse for 10 minutes, counting men, recalculating something, then he turned and rode south. Cobb had seen him. He looked at Harlan. Harlan looked back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The sheriff arrived on Thursday, as Harlan had said. Willis Pratt was a careful man who had been sheriff of Ector County for 9 years by surviving situations that required more than a badge. He sat with Harlan on the porch for 2 hours, asked questions, listened to answers. He read the offer in the envelope, turned it over, read the name of the company represented at the bottom. His expression changed slightly, just slightly. The way a man's expression changes when he recognizes something he was hoping not to recognize. "You know who's behind this?" Willis asked. "Got a fair idea," Harlan said. "This is going to take some time," Willis said. "I know," Harlan said. "They may come back before I can do anything about the legal side." "I know that too." "Harlan," Willis said, "you could take the offer. It's not a bad price." Harlan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the east side of the house, the garden. "My wife planted that garden," he said. "She's been gone 11 years. I still water it every morning." Willis understood. The land wasn't the point. The land was everything attached to the land. 22 years of mornings, a woman's garden, a well dug by hand, the particular silence of a place that knows you. The sheriff stood up. "I'll be back Friday," he said, "with deputies." "You don't need to do that," Harlan said. "No," Willis said. "I don't need to." He put on his hat. "But I'm going to." Friday came with company, the sheriff and 2 deputies from Odessa. Thomas Briggs from Midland, Harlan's oldest, who looked so much like his father 20 years ago that it stopped men mid-sentence. Carl Briggs from Fort Stockton, the younger one who had his mother's eyes and his father's silence. Harlan's sons had not been to the ranch in 3 years. Life had taken them to their own places, their own work, their own mornings. They stood in the yard and looked at the place where they'd grown up. Thomas looked at his father. "You should have written sooner," he said. "You have your own places to worry about," Harlan said. Carl had walked to the east side of the house. He was looking at his mother's garden. "You still keep it up," he said. "Every morning," Harlan said. The man from Austin arrived Saturday. His name was not important. What was important was what he carried. Documents that showed the company behind the land acquisition had made similar approaches in 3 other counties. Documents that showed the methods used. Documents that several men in Austin had been quietly building for 2 years, waiting for a situation like this one to make them matter. Willis read them carefully. When he was finished, he set them down. "This is enough," he said. What followed took 4 months. Legal proceedings that Harlan didn't fully understand, but trusted the man from Austin to handle. The leader of the 6 men was identified as a man wanted in 2 other states. The company dissolving its interest in Ector County without explanation. The writers never came back. Harlan never found out exactly why. He had a theory. He kept it to himself. His sons stayed for 2 weeks. Then they went back to their own places, their own work, their own mornings. Harlan went back to his routine. Up before sunrise, coffee on the porch, fence line in the afternoon, garden watered every morning. On the first morning after everyone had gone, he sat in his chair with his coffee and looked at his land. The same chair, the same cup. He drank the whole cup before it went cold. That was new. Here is what people in Ector County said about Harlan Briggs for the next 40 years. That he was the man who had stood down 6 armed men with a cup of coffee. That's not quite what happened. But it's not entirely wrong either. What happened was simpler and more complicated than any story that gets told about it afterward. A man had something that mattered to him. Someone tried to take it. He said no. The no was not the hard part. The hard part was saying it, knowing what might follow, knowing that no is not always enough, knowing that sometimes the people who hear no come back anyway with something worse. Harlan Briggs said no because the alternative was to leave a place that had his wife's garden in it. That's the whole calculation. Not heroism, not toughness, not the legend that grew up around the cup of coffee. Just a man who had decided that some things were worth the risk of what came after, and then dealt with what came after. The frontier was full of men who talked about what they wouldn't give up. Harlan Briggs was the kind of man who found out, not because he was looking for the test, because the test found him on a Tuesday morning when he was on his second cup of coffee, and he handled it the same way he handled everything else that came at him in 22 years on that land. He sat down, he thought about it, and then he did what needed doing. The coffee went cold. He dealt with that too. Every day on this channel, another story from the frontier, where what a man did mattered more than what he said. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by the spirit of West Texas. If it stayed with you, subscribe. Tell us in the comments. What would you have said to those 6 men? The next story is already on your screen.